So I want to go over some questions you guys asked me recently, and I want to start off with a question that I created based on a few different questions that you guys asked me. And that question is, should the Packers be active at the trade deadline? If we look back to last season around this time, the Packers were in a much different position than they are currently. They were sitting at 2-5. The season looked like it wasn't going to go in a direction where you're going to be competitive come playoff time. It looked like the Packers in their first year with Love starting, we're going to be on a sort of, bumpy road, and maybe the following season will be a year where you finally start to see some competitive play from the Packers. Of course, they completely turned it around, and so things changed. But at the time, Gutekunst made the decision to trade away Packers cornerback Rasul Douglas, and I think that with the circumstance at the time, 2-5, you have Rasul Douglas getting a little bit older. You have a team willing to give away a third-round pick. The Packers moved from a fifth-round pick to a third in the trade for Rasul Douglas, and so I fully get the decision to make that move if you're Brian Gutekunst. Now, in the end, if he would have known how the Packers team was going to turn it around, I think that he would have potentially not traded Rasul Douglas because, you'd have a solid cornerback come playoff time that you can rely on. But you don't always know exactly how things are going to go. And so I respect Gutekunst and the process he took to make that trade. But now looking at this season for the Packers now here in 2024, the Packers are in a completely different spot than they were at this time last season. Now the Packers are sitting at 5-2 after having two big victories against the Arizona Cardinals and then the Houston Texans this past game, beating a very, very good Texans team at Lambeau Field. And so the Packers right now, I think that if you're looking at, being buyers or sellers, I don't think it makes sense to be a seller when you're one of the better teams in the NFL. Now, every player has a cost, and if, the Packers got offered some first-round pick for someone that, like for Preston Smith, which that's not going to happen, but obviously if you get an insane offer, you'll consider it. But I think that with the way the Packers are built right now, trading away a player, in my mind, it doesn't make much sense. There have been some rumors floating around. It came out from Ian Rappaport in the past few days, here from Bill Huber at Sports Illustrated. According to NFL Network's Ian Rappaport, defensive end Preston Smith and offensive tackle Andre Dillard are among the veteran players whose names are generating interest in trade talks. So Preston Smith and Andre Dillard. Smith has, of course, still been playing a good amount of snaps on the edge for the Packers defense. Andre Dillard has not really played, if at all, as a Packers backup offensive lineman who they signed this past offseason. But here's the thing with both of these guys. I think Preston Smith is still an important piece of this Packers team. He is a little bit older. I think he's a solid veteran presence there in the Packers locker room. And the thing is, looking at the team right now, if you knew everyone was going to stay healthy, maybe you trade away someone like Andre Dillard. The thing is, you never know what's going to happen with injuries. And if the Packers were to suddenly lose Zach Tom and Rasheed Walker all of a sudden, you would have wished you didn't trade away Andre Dillard. And so for that reason, with the Packers, as competitive as they are, they don't really have many holes on this team. There are a couple maybe, but with the way this team is right now, I don't think it makes sense to trade away Smith or Andre Dillard. Even though Preston Smith hasn't played at a top-tier level, he is still an important piece of this Packers defense. And unless you got some crazy offer, I don't think that trading away either of these guys makes sense. Now, when it comes to the other side, I think if the Packers did anything, they should trade for someone. Of course, last week talked about Myles Garrett and Max Crosby, which I got a question again today from Bo Murphy-VF5ZL, said, should we trade for Max Crosby or Myles Garrett or some other pass rusher? Last week I was thinking I wouldn't be that opposed, even if it was a first-round pick and a second-round pick. I know it's a lot of capital to spend on someone, especially for a Packers team that isn't typically super active and making some big splashy trades come trade deadline time. But the way the Packers pass rush had been playing, I was very concerned. I was concerned that Rashawn Gary wasn't really playing up to expectations. And because of that, I thought that making a move for Crosby or Garrett would have taken this offense or defensive line to a completely different level. There's no doubt about that. The question is, do you want to part ways with those draft picks? But after seeing this past week's game against the Houston Texans, Rashawn Gary had his best day of the entire season. He had 6 pressures, and before that, I believe he had 9 pressures in those previous 6 games. So he came alive, and I think that if you have Rashawn Gary playing at that level consistently, and that was a Texans offensive line that has not been very good this season, but if you have Rashawn Gary playing at that more elite type level, then you don't need to make a trade for a Max Crosby or Myles Garrett. And the only reason I think you do is if you're concerned about Rashawn Gary not playing at a top tier level. And so seeing that this past week made me more like, okay, we don't necessarily need to make that move. Would it be nice? Of course it would, to get a player of that caliber. But I think that Brian Gutekunst is a type of GM where he doesn't really want to trade away those very valuable draft picks. If anything, we've seen him trade players away for top tier or for top draft picks like Devontae Adams, Aaron Rodgers. Those are different situations based on where the Packers were in their team building and that kind of thing. But right now, I just think that they don't need to make a move for Crosby or Garrett to be a team that can go all the way, in my opinion. Would it help to get those guys? No doubt. I just don't know if the risk to reward is there when it comes to losing future cheap contracts from first and second round players, which are so crucial in building competitive teams over years and years. Because sure, you could trade away all your first and second round picks for the next 2 seasons, and your team would be insane this year. But then come 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the line, you're gonna have trouble with the salary cap because you have a ton of high-priced players and you have no cheap rookie deals, which we have right now, like with Dobbs, with Christian Watson, Evan Williams, Edgerrin Cooper. It's important with the salary cap to have your roster filled with lots of guys who are still in the rookie deals so that you have that extra capital to spend on guys like Xavier McKinney. And if we start trading away for these other guys, it's going to be harder in the long run to build, I think, a consistently competitive team. And so that's why I would lean toward the Packers not making a move like that. So I think they should just stay put. The fact that the Packers got Brandon McManus this past week, I would have said maybe trade for a kicker if someone out there wants to part ways with their kicker. Don't know why a competitive team would, just because they need a kicker too. So unless you had some bottom tier team that had a good kicker, maybe they would make a trade. But now the fact the Packers have McManus, I think now the Packers don't necessarily have any massive holes on their team that I think where they have a necessity to fill it via trade. Could they add some depth or some talent? Sure. And maybe they will. I just don't know if I see them making a trade, trading away top tier first and second round draft capital. Now to a few more of your questions. Here we have from @Wisconsin Sports Fanatic, will Quay Walker, number 7, get his position back after the way Eric Wilson played? That is a good question. Quay went down with his head injury, looked like a concussion there. Eric Wilson came in, had 3 pressures, 2 sacks, 4 stops per PFF. He looked really, really good. And honestly, in just my opinion, just from watching that game live, it felt to me like Eric Wilson was making some more splash plays more often than Quay Walker typically does. And do I think that he's going to just take Quay's spot when Quay comes back healthy? No, I don't think it's going to happen. I think the Packers are pretty... I think that after seeing how Wilson played, they may try to get him in more. I don't see the Packers just moving off of Quay all of a sudden. I think that, honestly, I would rather see what the Packers defense can do with Wilson back there because he seemed to be better against the run, in my opinion, and I really liked him paired up with Edgerrin Cooper. So I still think Quay will come back and be one of the starters just based on what the Packers will typically do. But I think that Wilson may be a more talented player than Quay Walker, so we'll keep an eye on that one. And then here we have from @Taylon Briggs, is the run defense still a concern? So this past week's game against the Texans, the Packers did a great job at holding CJ Stroud in check to less than 100 yards, which was crazy to see the performance from the secondary and the pass rush. And the only area the Texans were able to really get anything going was on the ground, where they had 4.3 yards a carry. Joe Mixon had a big day. And even though the Packers, allowed Joe Mixon to get a good amount of yards, all in all, they allowed 4.3 yards a carry in that game, as I said. And if you look at the run ranks when it comes to run defense and yards per carry allowed, the 16th best team, which is the Cowboys, allow 4.5 yards a carry when it comes to run defense. And so even though it was a down day for the Packers defense, a little bit when it came to stopping the run, all in all, it wasn't that bad of a day. It was a pretty average day, actually, when you look at defenses from around the NFL. And so I would say so far I've been pretty pleased with the Packers' run defense, especially based on how they've played in years past. But right now the Packers are 13th in rush yards per game allowed, 9th in rush yards per play at 4.3, and 9th in EPA per rush allowed. So this Packers' run defense has gotten to another level here with Jeff Hafley, and even though they allowed some big runs from Joe Mixon, I am pretty pleased with what this Packers' run defense has looked like. Now we have from @BillM8124, why are they using Reed for punt returns instead of Nixon? It's a good question. I think that, Reed is a more talented player with the ball in his hands overall, But I was looking at the stats, and Nixon on 4 punt returns averages 12 yards per attempt, where Reed on 5 returns only has 4.8 yards per attempt. So Keyshawn Nixon has been more successful returning punts, and so we'll see if they keep switching him back and forth or what happens there. But so far, Nixon has been a more productive player returning punts. And there was also another question here on Jaden Reed. Let me find it from at CDIZZ557. Can we please get Jaden off punt returns and make Nixon our full-time guy? Too many botches and weird things happen with Jaden when Jaden is back there. Guy's an absolute baller. You don't put potential number 1 caliber receivers on the punt team. I feel like I understand the Packers giving it a try and having Jaden Reed back there because he is electric with the ball in his hands. And part of me feels like in the long run, Reed may be a better returner just because of his speed. And like if I had to, have a guy, try to break away and miss tackles, I'll pick Reed overall. But Nixon seems to have been more successful returning punts so far. But you do make a good point. You probably don't want to put your guy back there to risk injury, but these guys are always out there making plays. There's always risk of injury. And then here we have another one on the trade front from at Ryan and AND Mila 2485. Which is the more likely to be traded, Stokes, Dillard, or Preston Smith, and what kind of compensation could we reasonably get? All of their roles has greatly diminished the last 2 weeks. So going back to my first topic I was touching on, I don't think the Packers should trade any of these guys, even though they haven't gone out there necessarily, been productive players. Stokes hasn't played quite as much. Dillard hasn't really played. Preston Smith hasn't been that productive this season. He's been worse than in years past. I just think that for depth, come playoff time, you never know what kind of injuries can hit a team. And I think it's better to keep these guys than get like a 5th round pick. I don't see these guys going for more than a 5th or 6th, honestly. Maybe a 4th, I don't know. But I just think it's more valuable to keep these guys and try to, load up on draft capital just for health reasons. Then from at God of Thunder 9379. You think that this kicker we have now is the real deal, or was this just an amazing happening? I hope this is our kicker until he retires. If he's the real deal, go Pack, go. I think he is the real deal. I think that when you look at the fact that he's been in the NFL for a long time, has a ton of experience, the fact that he played in the playoffs before, I think he was 10 for 10 in the playoffs in his career, earlier in his career, like in 2014 or 2015. Now, is he going to make every kick? No, he's probably going to have some misses, but I think that the Packers have a guy where on kicks less than 50 yards, he has been a very good kicker. And so I think that it looks very promising, and just based on his history, what he's done as a veteran, kicker, I think that he is the answer here for the time being, and I think he is around 33 years old, if I saw that correctly, and so hopefully he'll stay here for a while, because the Packers have had so much inconsistency at kicker, and it looks like they may have found the answer, at least for now. Now from at Gunzilla 918, who will have more interceptions by the end of the year, Jay Love or Xavier McKinney? That's a good question. I'm probably going to go with Jordan Love. I'd say typically, looking at quarterback stats, it's probably easier to, rack up those interceptions than a defensive player to get interceptions. Hopefully that's not the case, but I think it'd be pretty crazy if McKinney outproduces Love in interceptions. That's an interesting question. Before I saw that, I thought at first I saw, I don't know what I saw, honestly, but interesting question. Then we have from at Bible Talk Zone, should we be worried about this next game against the Jaguars being a trap game? I feel like anytime you play a team that is not very good and you're, expected to win, those are always games you have to be weary of, because I think sometimes, if you're the team, you go in and you sort of just think it's going to be easier. You think that, because you're the better team, that you expect yourself to win. I think sometimes teams can come in and play down to the talent of their opponent. And so any game like this where you have a team that probably wants to come in and show the league that, we're not some terrible team, we can actually compete with top tier teams, you're going to get the best out of the Jaguars. So I think the Packers definitely have to come in prepared, and you can never take any NFL game lightly. And there's been games in the past, I even feel like a few years ago when Rodgers was quarterback, there was some game in Jacksonville where the Packers went in, should have won it, and lost. And so you can't take any NFL game, lightly here. Then from at Jackson Blackburn 4579. Who do you think will be the 3 teams out of the NFC North that will make the playoffs? No way all 4 make it. So I guess technically all 4 could. The odds of that happening are pretty low. If I had to guess right now, I would say the Bears. The Bears have been good. Caleb Williams has been a lot better they have done it against teams that haven't been great. So that would be my prediction there. I think the Packers will make the playoffs. But that is it for today. Thank you for all you guys who asked questions. If you want more Packers content, feel free to subscribe down below, and I'll see you guys next time.